The following is a recording of the latest episode of Advanced Manufacturing Live. Previous episodes of Advanced Manufacturing Live are available on advancedmanufacturing.org/live. Follow SME Media on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and YouTube to join us live every other Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Live. I'm SME Media Senior Editor Michael McConnell. It's no longer a question of whether to adopt digital technology. The question is how to do it. Those are among the findings in Rockwell Automation's 11th annual State of Smart Manufacturing Report. Our guest today is Andrew Stump, Rockwell's Director of Technical Enablement. He is a recognized global industry leader with almost 30 years of experience in project delivery, strategic consulting, and business leadership, helping global manufacturers apply automation solutions in their digital transformations. In his current role as Director of Technical Enablement at Rockwell Automation, he is responsible for driving growth and adoption of new technologies and strategic portfolio offerings to unlock new value for the manufacturing industry. Andrew holds both a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and an MBA from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Andrew will discuss where the digital transformation process is now, how it got here, and where it might be headed in the future. He's also agreed to take some questions from our audience, so be sure to submit those in the comments, and we'll answer a few at the end of our episode. Andy, welcome to Advanced Manufacturing Live.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Andy Stump, as you mentioned, Director of Technical Enablement at Rockwell Automation. And my role focuses on helping our teams, partners, and customers understand how to apply technology in ways that drive meaningful business outcomes. That's what I do every day. So a big part of that is working with manufacturers who are trying to bridge that gap between having technology available and actually creating value from it. So that means spending a lot of time working with automation, talking about workforce transformation, cyber, operational intelligence, digital transformations overall.
Well, let's get into this report.
Mhm.
How did it come to be? Who do you talk to compile it? How do you get all this data put together?
Yeah, absolutely. So this year's report reflects input from more than 1,500 manufacturing decision makers. And that's important. It's decision makers across, I think, 17 different countries. And what's important with that, as I mentioned, is the respondents, they're not just observing the industry from a distance. Almost all of them are directly involved in the operational technology or the investment decisions within their organization. So this group spans a broad range of industries, company sizes, and leadership roles. Over half of them are representing organizations over $1 billion in annual revenue. So these are impactful, world leading organizations that are responsible for determining where the future investments are made within this space. And what I always find valuable about this report is that it helps us separate these temporary industry trends from where broader shifts are actually starting to occur globally. And that's really important because it gives us a way to see where manufacturers are aligned, where their priorities are changing, and where that industry is going over time.
Mm. And what made Rockwell decide to start putting it together about 11 or so years ago?
Yeah, it's been 11 years ago, and manufacturers were in a very different place at that time. There was a lot of concepts we talk about today, like Industry 4.0, digital transformation, connected operations. These were all kind of emerging ideas within the industry. And, organizations were trying to figure out what these technologies might mean for their businesses. So the goal of the report at that time was really to create a pulse check on the industry. And we wanted to understand what manufacturers were experiencing, where they were investing, and how those priorities were beginning to change over time. We kind of saw that inflection point of technology becoming such a key part. And what I find fascinating about all of this is that over the years, wow, it's become so much more than that. Today
Mm.
we look back across more than a decade of data, and we've really got a good indication of how the industry's evolved. And it's really moved from this experimentation to an implementation, and now to what I like to refer to as kind of the execution era of manufacturing with technology.
Hmm. Well, let's get into it a little bit. What are some of the findings?
Yeah. So, when we look at some of the biggest changes, some of the biggest findings we see is that manufacturers, quite honestly, they're no longer asking whether they should be investing in digital technologies, right? Most already have. That becomes really apparent this year in the report. Kind of earlier, a decade ago, we spent a lot of time talking about pilot projects, we talking about proof of concepts and deployments like that. Today, these conversations are much more practical. They're much more rooted in what's happening now because that's important. And that question is not kind of the what I should do. It's more how do I get value from these investments I've made, right? They've been making investments for a decade. Technology is advancing fast. And one of the strongest themes in the report this year is the shift from adoption to execution. Performance is no longer determined by who has the most technology anymore. It's determined by which organizations are able to embrace that, apply it, and connect that technology, the data, the people. That's what's driving the outcomes.
Uh, are the companies you talk to, are they pleased with where they're at? Or they still think they have a ways to go?
Yeah, it's they're pleased with that. It's a tough one with technology, right? With you adopt. They're finding that they're looking at how does the things they've invested in and the things on the horizon now driving that value. And one of the things for me that was really surprising this year is what didn't show up in the report, like last year and private previous years. For the first time in that 11-year period for this report, normally there's like one dominant concern, right? That's really happened in that. And this year, wow, we saw workforce shortages, cyber, energy costs, supply chain pressures all clustering together.
Hmm.
And that's influencing these manufacturers overall. So it's that it's a surprise for us with all of that. It's all happening at the same time. It's forcing them to deal with so many things, which is causing them to think about value technology adoption differently than they have in years past.
Hmm. And in the report, it talks about 90% of manufacturers said they need digital transformation as part to
Yeah.
stay competitive.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I think 10 years ago, we talked, as I mentioned, a lot about digital transformation is something they should consider. And today, data is telling us something a bit different that we can't ignore in this report this year, right? When 9 out of 10 manufacturers, kind of this 90% mark that you mentioned, say that
Mm.
digital transformation is necessary to stay competitive, we have to take note. We're not talking about buying another piece of software or adding another dashboard within manufacturing, right? We're talking about having the ability to adapt and they're asking like how do you respond when all these cluster of things are happening, when labor is tight, when energy costs are rising, cyber threats are increasing, all of these things are happening at the same time. So digital transformation and technology adoption has become less about you know the things itself and more about how it's helping them adapt their production, adapt their operations. It's a model that manufacturers are using to navigate that uncertainty. So that's why we see 90% say they need digital transformation to stay competitive.
That leads to the question though: Are they actually making those transformations,
Mhm.
or are they just talking about it right now?
Yeah, undoubtedly, they are definitely doing it.
Okay.
5 years ago, I would have said differently, right? 5 years ago, as I mentioned many times, we've been talking about pilot projects. We've been talking about what they were going to invest in. Today, we are talking with manufacturers about scale. The data, the responses in the report very much support that. One of the clearest indicators in the report is that I think something like under 20%, like 18% of respondents still consider themselves in the pilot phase. And
Mm,
60% say they're now actively supporting their operations and scaling. We've seen like a flip there, right? It's
mm,
that where it used to be 60, 70 piloting, 10 and doing it, that's inverted. So they're doing it. The industry has crossed that threshold. Manufacturers aren't asking, does it work anymore? We're in a historically slow evolving industry, some skepticism in technology, but it's flipped. And they're asking how do they deploy it? It's a different conversation than we've had in the past.
If the 18% that are still in that pilot phase, at this stage, they're falling behind, right?
Yeah. They
Yeah.
are. They're behind their competitors. They are still in the apprehension, gotta get going stage, so they do find themselves, unfortunately, a bit behind.
Well, let's talk about getting falling behind or not, but let's talk about AI a little bit. That's so
Mhm.
many angles you can take with that. I think your report said that 34% of respondents said their operations are being augmented by AI. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. That's absolutely.
Is that is that number higher than you thought at this stage, or lower? Where does it fall?
Yeah, great question. I'd say it's interesting where I think I would expect it to be at this stage. I mean, AI, we all know AI is a huge focus everywhere, right? It's topic of conversation in our personal lives, in our work lives, it's everywhere. But manufacturing has always approached new technologies with a bit of caution, right? And for good reason. Reliability matters, uptime, production when things go down, it's big dollars. So when one third of operations are already augmented by I mean, that is a huge signal that AI has moved beyond experimentation, like we keep saying, right? And into real production environments. So the bigger story isn't where we are today. I think it's where we're headed. So yes, it seems like a low number, but from an industry slow to respond, it's actually pretty high at this
Mm,
stage and I think, when we look at the numbers, I think manufacturers expect that to grow from like 34% today to over 50% by 2030. And that tells me we are entering a scaling phase and success is going to be determined less by that adoption and more by that effective integration of the technology, how they govern it and apply it.
where was that figure 3 or 4 years ago, or were you even asking about it 3 or 4 years
Yeah,
ago?
we were asking about the technology, but it was
Okay.
that pilot stage, single
Mhm.
digits, low double digits. It was still those early innovators. They were doing it, but it was at pilot scale. So
Mm.
yes, the questions were asked, but it was much lower than it was. This 30 some odd percent is now main scale production, right? That's huge from that standpoint.
Yeah. So talk about main scale production, what have you. What ways are they using AI to augment their processes?
Yeah, and what's interesting in that is with what manufacturers are and aren't using AI for a single purpose, right? They're no longer just pilot on this one thing. They're kind of broadly applying it to get value in a lot of different areas. It isn't just a singular model predictive control or some data dashboard, right? They're applying it across quality improvement. We see strong data pointing to cybersecurity. The traditional process optimization and decision making are of course still there, but that broader shift is that we're moving from those traditional automation systems, right? And yes, there were pockets of model predictive control and advanced process control, but those that were executing tasks slightly modified. We're now seeing kind of this whole shift to intelligent operations where AI and data are helping those people creating, running, and maintaining those systems, actually getting data to help them make better decisions. So it's
Mm.
acting almost as a force multiplier and helping them identify issues sooner, helping them recognize patterns faster and make better decisions.
So they're definitely seeing the benefit. They no longer
Yeah.
have to be sold on the benefit.
Absolutely. If they weren't seeing the benefit, we wouldn't be seeing that continued investment. We wouldn't see that
Mm.
number shifting to the 30 some percent with
Yeah.
plans to go to 50, 55 in the next few years.
And that's by what I think the report said 2030 or so. It'll be over half at 30,
Yeah.
54%. Does that surprise you, or at this stage, that's right where you expect it to be?
Yeah, I think it surprises me a little bit because if I look at historic data in manufacturing, it's a long tail of slow progression, right? To go from 10 to 30 to 50 in a matter of a few years, that's historically a pretty aggressive growth pattern, which
Mm.
signifies it's real, it's happening. And I think that signifies we're past this tipping point. People recognize that they need to be doing this. So when one third of those operations today are already AI enabled, it ranks, the data says it ranks as the top driver for business outcomes. We are no longer talking about a trend of the future. It's happening, right? It's there. Yeah.
And you talked about the tipping point. It's interesting to me that the tipping point is, only at 34%. I
Yeah.
mean, but essentially, but can you explain that a little bit, how you can get to a tipping point when still is not half of the people that are out there,
Yeah.
companies that are out there using it?
Yeah, I look at it a lot of times when you look at historical trends, like I said, that long tail. So
Yeah.
that tipping point is when you really start to see that increase. And when you see something go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 9, and you see that long tail, by the time you get to the 30, 50, 90, you're already into that hook in manufacturing. And
Yeah.
since we're already past that tail shortened, we're already into that climb. That 30 to 50 says it's happening, right? And that's when we see that flywheel effect happening.
Hmm. Do you wanna take a moment to remind, viewers that they could submit questions in the chat, box, and we will, try to get those to those at the end of the episode? Um, does your report get into whether digital transformation is gonna, get into job losses, or even how it's going to change jobs? I mean, not necessarily costing jobs, but certainly changing them.
Sure. This is probably one of the most common questions we hear as an organization. And we've long had that with automation and now specifically with AI. And what's interesting is that the data in the report tells a very different story from job loss, right? It tells a story of workforce evolution, right? When we ask the questions about what people are doing, it's like 40% of manufacturers kind of acknowledge that they've been really focused on reskilling employees over the past year. And the interesting one too is that 90% say that they expect the roles that they have today to keep evolving and changing. It was not a signal of we're going to reduce roles because of the technology. It was we can't find enough people today, we're going to evolve those roles to get more from them. And what we're seeing is it's taking repetitive analysis tasks away. It's taking routine tasks away. But what it's doing is it's giving people more time to focus on problem solving and decision making and innovation, which drives further margin expansion and higher dollars. So I've always believed that technology improves efficiency. People are what drive outcomes, and manufacturing, they're making the most progress with that, with trying to combine technology and people together, and they're investing in both right now.
That's reassuring, I'm sure. Um, your report also said that, energy, workforce issues, and cybersecurity are the top manufacturing challenges.
Yeah.
Let's get into that a lot about why are those the big 3?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I think what stands out to me is that manufacturers, they're not dealing with isolated challenges anymore. They're just getting slammed with all of these things at the same time. And that is where we see some of that difference. They're operating in an environment with these multiple pressures hitting simultaneously, right? What are those? It's like energy costs
Mhm.
up and
Yeah.
down, workforce shortages, uh, data leading to cybersecurity. Those are all concerns that are competing for attention at the same time within these organizations to go get solved. And, cyber is especially interesting because it's become so tightly connected to operational performance, right? As manufacturers increase that connectivity, right, they're deploying more digital technologies that's now become resilience and security become like foundational requirements for them. You can't decouple them. You have to consider both. And this is causing them to respond most effectively by treating them together and not as separate problems, right? Because they are so tightly together. They're building operations that absorb and respond to multiple disruptions by thinking about security, operations, and people altogether.
Mm. It's to mention cybersecurity, from what I've read in your report, they're just getting more cyber incidents are getting more and more common. Gosh, I think your report said 46% of respondents had an issue. What kind of things are occurring? What are they, what's happening?
Yeah, cyber, oh, that's a one that is top of mind for every executive, right? Risk
Yeah.
mitigation, cyber mitigation. When we look at cyber, we have seen that steadily climb in importance. It's been relevant, but we've seen so many organizations who have been faced with cyber attacks in various
Mhm.
forms, from outside, from inside. There's just no like safe space, and we can no longer think about as just disconnecting from the world to be safe. If you're gonna take advantage of these technologies to get that productivity and get that efficiency and using technology, you gotta think of it hand in hand, right? So as we integrate IT and OT together, we have to rely on people who understand this space. And the report reflects that reality. Cyber has evolved from being viewed as an IT issue, right? Like it had been over the previous
Yeah.
decade. It's the IT departments, keep us safe. And that's just no longer the case. It's everybody's business. Business continuity and resilience depend on it. And manufacturers are becoming more connected every day. And cybersecurity naturally becomes important part of that foundational discussion.
Did your report get into anything about how expensive these are? Because I mean, they can be really devastating. I know.
Yeah, they sure can. And we hear a lot of times it's not so much maybe the necessary monetary loss, which
Yeah.
can be extremely high. It's
Sure.
brand perception, it's customer perception. Damage like that has, just amazing amounts of impact to an organization. So they really need to make sure that they're, protecting their products so they don't damage or hurt people, which in turn hurts their brand. So it's a multi-pronged, potential impact in these organizations.
The 46% that have experienced incidents that you mentioned in your report, is that a higher or lower figure than the last few years? I guess, was there a trend there?
Yeah, definitely higher. It's going up,
Okay,
right? We
okay.
see it as we say a lot of times it's no longer if, it's a matter of when. And I think when you approach it with that in mind, um, you no longer can put a strategy in place just to block it. You have to have mitigation strategies. You have to do the best things you do to do what's right for the business, have good mitigation strategies in place, and understand how to detect as fast as you can, be able to recover as fast as you can, and mitigate the impact if it does happen. That's what we're seeing people thinking about every day.
But you have to accept that it will happen.
If you don't accept that it can and likely will happen, I think you're making the wrong decisions, right? You're making decisions under a false belief that you can protect against it. And I think you have to do things that help minimize as much as you can.
And what are some, from a high level, what are some mitigation strategies that
Yeah.
companies should look at?
Yeah, we've seen an interesting trend where, the more you connect with technology, the more data you use, the more vulnerable to cyber you are. Well, in order to compensate for that, you have to start to use technology like AI to begin to monitor for you, help detect sooner, help alleviate that problem. So I think, some of those strategies, people are using technology to detect faster, understand what's happening, the breadth of things when they do happen, right? Or to find vulnerabilities to prevent it from happening. But I think it's also strategies in place to make sure that you have things backed up. You have multiple sources of places to run. You're not dependent on one person, one computer, one thing anymore. They're figuring out how to spread that across to ride through these challenges.
Let's get into data with something else I thought was
Yeah.
interesting in your report. Your report said that only 43% of manufacturers say they are using data effectively,
Mhm.
which is surprising to me. And then I'm wondering what are they what's the majority of people doing with their data?
Yeah,
Oh,
I find it equally surprising. I
yeah,
think it's actually one of the most important statistics in the entire report. Maybe you can kind of miss that in that report, but it says a lot. Most
yeah.
manufacturers, they don't have a data problem, meaning they have enough data. What they have is a context problem. They have data, but they don't know how to use it, meaning because it's not in the right format, it's isolated. Different data aren't connected. So we feel very strong it's a context of data problem. There have been historians in data collection systems since the beginning of electronic systems and manufacturing. So it's not a shortage of data. What we see that organizations are collecting more information than ever before. The challenge is that data lives in different systems. It's in different departments. It has different formats, and that's why only 43% of that data is being used effectively. That's
Hmm.
hard. That's the hard part. And manufacturers that we see pulling ahead right now from their peers are the ones who understand that, and they are actually like figuring out how to connect the data, put context around it and putting insights into the people that need to change their workflow. That's where we're seeing a bit of separation in the herd using that, because at the end of the day, data by itself does not create value, right? It's a means to an end. So the goal is better decisions, and that's what needs to come out of it with contextualized data operations.
You would think AI would help company manufacturers parse that and figure some of this stuff
Yeah.
out.
It absolutely does. Technology is a huge part of that. But, the idea that you just send all of your data to one place and magical things happen, it's a bit elusive there, right? I think there still has to be, when you look at manufacturing, many things happen at very high speeds. And if you don't have systems that can correlate data and activity at very tight intervals, you're missing a big opportunity. So if you think about on the plant floor, if
Mhm.
something that matters happens at a millisecond and the systems collecting the data are off by a second, when it rides up, you have no correlation. So you got to really think about where, and how you're putting context to connect things together.
Mm, that's a good point. Well, I think now we can take a few questions from our audience. Very exciting to try this out. Thanks for agreeing to do it, Andy. Uh,
Absolutely.
all right, so let me look here. All right. Ford recently rehired engineers after acknowledging that they overestimated the benefits of technology. Should we expect more of this as companies try to find the right mix?
Yeah, I think this is always something the industry goes through trying to figure out what the right combination is. I think there's always a natural inclination to try to save some money, but I think that is a great example where being able to put people to work in more value add tasks with data and AI helping them leads to better outcomes. It is not just like the report says, it's not just getting rid of people, it's redeploying those people. And if people have over pivoted in the last few years on that maybe false promise or maybe misunderstanding of the impact to their business, I think we will see people um, hiring back in. Now, we may not see people coming back in the same roles as before.
Okay, sure.
We may see people coming in roles that AI can help augment or make better, but I think we will see some of that.
Uh, Another question. You mentioned that we are in the phase of companies now trying to prove out the tech that they purchased. Are there other factors contributing to higher adoption rates? Has automation and AI just gotten that much better, or have companies been finding better ways to use their data?
Yeah. I attribute a lot of like with AI in particular. One of the things we know that I mentioned before, manufacturing always is slow to adopt. AI in particular, everyone understands it from their personal life, right? It's everywhere, it's pervasive. So bringing it into manufacturing is less scary than maybe other things were, because we use these things every day now. Most people are using them every day in the
Yeah.
office and other spots. So it's less scary to bring them in. I think products have really focused on the usability side of it. technology, many times in years past, you had to be a super expert to use some technologies. That's no longer the case, right? So it's been made easier for the masses, and I think that has helped, accelerate adoption within that.
Uh, Another question. Was there a big difference in the adoption rate of new technologies based on company size, industry, and or location?
Yeah, overall, I would say no. In general, I mean, many large companies, a lot of these still, cross departments and that. Most of the data signified general trends. There may have been a few differences in percentage points, here and there, but for the most part, it was a universal trend, large and small, where this has been happening overall. What we do here anecdotally in talking with some smaller organizations is they realize they have to do something to compete against their bigger, competitors. So therefore, they're adopting things like technology to try to compensate and do that. So it's leading to a lot of consistency across.
Looking here. I think that's all the questions we have right now. If there's anyone else that has a question before we wrap up, this now is the best time. And he's been gracious to answer these for us. We appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like that's it. Well, uh, we have reached the end of the episode, and I'd like to thank Rockwell Automation and Andy Stump for being our guest today. Thank you, Andy.
Absolutely.
Remember that SME and SME Media are here to help you stay up to date on all things manufacturing. You can find links to podcasts, webinars, our publications, and news by visiting us at advancedmanufacturing.org. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.